So just so everyone knows, we're about to have a debate with Walt and Azgerod, and Walt's going to be defending that if epistemology is based in probability, then most beliefs are improbable, and Azgerod's going to be taking the opposition, be a normal back and forth, and at the end we'll have a voting poll to decide on who performed better in the debate. So Walt, since you're taking the affirmative, if you want to go ahead and open up, go for it.
Yeah, I'd be delighted. So, first off, just some important definitions here, because we are talking about epistemology, and a lot of the time, right, the standard view is probably just something like justified true belief. When I say belief in this prop, though, I'm referring more to propositions or claims, and of course, there's a few things that go on with that. So we're looking at how these basic claims that someone might make actually wind up entailing more claims. And that's a big reason as to why most are improbable. So just as an example of that, X is experienced, meaning that there's some perception of X is a very basic claim, right? And that seems pretty straightforward. But if I was to say something like all real men were alive in the 1950s, right, that would be a really complex claim that entails men that are real, that were alive in that the 1950s exist, right, or occurred, and that's much more complicated. And if I'm going to just be stacking these layers of complexity into claims, into propositions, then they're going to be the more I add to it, the less probable that specific outcome is. And as far as say a probability-driven epistemology, in my view, so that's one thing. And there's a lot more of these compound kind of claims, these complex claims, than there are simple claims out there. So it's easy for me to go ahead and just add together any series of really basic, the most basic propositions I could possibly muster, and then just start adding conjunctions and things like that, and whatever. But then each time I do it, it's hinging on one more detail, one more thing. So it makes most propositions improbable in that sense, and the only thing that will mitigate that is going to be the evidence. So sure, fine. There are a couple notes here though that I did want to go over in opening. One, two logically equivalent claims are not necessarily the same claim, which is really important to note. So for instance, let's take a claim that we would probably all of us would agree is false, right? Which is something like physics is not a science. There may be that one person out there that wants to argue that physics is not a science, but I'm saying let's just take that as false. That claim could be argued to be logically equivalent, or that proposition could be argued to be equivalent to physics is not a science, and some philosophers use symbolic logic. Just because those claims would have the same truth value, we know that one of the pieces of the conjunction there is always false, so the entire conjunction would be seen as false. That doesn't mean that those two things are the same, right? There's additional information entailed in the conjunction that was not there in the previous statement. And there's probably going to be some counterpoint here eventually, where we say hey, look, I can make an infinite number of true claims because look, there's so many things that are true, and so because I can have my infinity against your infinity, we're just kind of stacked and it's even. Not really. You'd have to look at how you'd be doing that, and at a certain point, you're just kind of repeating the same information over and over. Further, there are some basic claims that there are more basic claims that are false than basic claims that are true, right? So while every claim may have a binary truth value of true or false, there are claims that are made within certain paradigms, we can just use ontological paradigms as an example. So there's a hypothetical entity A that exists somewhere, right? We could say that A exists materially, or A exists nomenologically, or hypothetical A exists only in the mind. A exists as a quantum particle or field. A exists only in the mind in a Berkeleyan sense, whatever. And we're going to see that more of these lenses are going to be inaccurate than accurate. Some of these lenses are just going to be completely false. And if we go further, I think that we could see something like, say, the denial of the existence of God, something like akin to a hard atheism, right? Even if we were to say, well, most of these lenses are going to be right, like, how would that make sense? So, like, most people aren't hard atheists, right? The God position is looked at by Christians, Muslims, not Buddhists, but like Hindus, like whatever, and even like lack theists, right? And they may have varying agreements or disagreements on what God is, meaning that most of the conceptions of God that are going to be thrown out in these systems, which are mutually exclusive, are going to be incorrect. There's more than one way to be incorrect on this issue. And so if I was to look at all of that and I look back at this epistemology problem, I'm just going like, man, it really seems like more claims, more propositions are improbable than probable. Most lenses seem wrong. Most lenses seem mutually exclusive. We're definitely not all saying the same thing. And that's kind of where I'll get this started here.
Okay, cool. So my argument, I admit, doesn't really intersect with a lot of the claims that you made there. My claim is just that it's impossible for there to be more probable claims than improbable claims, because there are the exact same number of probable claims as there are improbable claims, because for every probable claim, there is exactly one, like, there is at least one improbable claim that like corresponds to it, which is its negation. Like if we say this particular Christian God exists, and we say that this is a highly improbable claim, there is a very, very highly probable claim, which is that this specific God does not exist. And so there are an exactly equal number of probable and improbable claims, and then there are other claims besides which are neither probable nor improbable. And so the number of improbable claims is less than 50% of all claims, and so is the number of probable claims.
So I don't know if that holds with the paradigm problem. So this is where I would want you to kind of help me here. So let's say that we're talking about how to run down these claims. So for instance, like we could take a hard atheist denial of God, right? So like just as an example, so the hard atheist says no gods exist, right? From here, where do we go? So the Christian God is a very specific claim. There is the negation there. There's the negation of the hard atheist claim. And we're saying that this is going to generate consistently always an even number of claims without these like particular attachments or entailments, or where do we go? It seems like where it seems like to me is that the hard atheist here now has like a much higher burden past say just like proving God impossible in an epistemic sense. They would have to go and say further the Christian God is impossible, further the Muslim God is impossible, etc. Right? They're making multiple claims with that claim, right? Because it's a universal speaking to a whole bunch of particulars.
Say that I'll grant you that the claim of a hard atheist saying that there is no God whatsoever, none of the gods exist, and I know this to be true. Let's say that this is improbable. There is a corresponding highly probable claim that there is at least one God. And you can do that with literally any claim. If something's probable, then its negation is improbable. Every claim has a unique negation. So there are exactly the same number of probable claims as there are improbable claims. And then there are some claims that are neither.
So I think this is okay. So this will bring me to the next part of the issue here. So like we have these claims, right, that do entail a series of complex things, right, in order to substantiate the claims. So like the claim that God is impossible, right, is still like a complex claim, right? Like we're speaking to possibility in different forms. Which kind of possibility are we speaking to? And then that possibility is well formulated in the syntax of the question. We have what the operating definitions of God are that apply here. All of those things. But then any rebuttal to that is also going to have some complex kind of structure, right? Things that need to be true in order for the rebuttal to make sense, right? That we're referring to some sensical God concept in the rebuttal, that it matches the negation, that everything else in that claim is coherent. And so it seems like if I was to look at that and say, well, if I'm just going to run down these entailments and kind of just multiply out what outcomes would be from all of these complex kind of subparts of these statements, it seems like both are improbable, right? It seems like probably, and that's probably a consequence of the specificity of the statements.
So what I'm hearing is that you're saying that there is some claim, at least one claim. This may not be all you're saying, but you are at least saying that there's at least one claim, such that like some claim A, such that A and not A are both improbable. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now the probability of not A is equal to 1 minus the probability of A. Are you familiar with this?
No. So this is where you get to teach me epistemology, man.
Right. Yeah, I can drop a link in the chat if we want. But yeah, like to determine like let's say that we have the probability of a coin flip or something, and we're like, okay, so there's like the probability of getting heads is 0.5. Therefore, the probability of not getting heads is 1 minus 0.5, which is 0.5. Let me just look up not A. It's called the complement rule. Okay. So I'm just going to drop the Wikipedia link to for the entry on complementary the complementary event, and we can find the specific passage where it mentions how to compute the probability of it. So just look at this this Wikipedia article here, and there's just like one subheading, the complement rule, and it says that is for an event A, the probability of the complement of A is equal to 1 minus the probability of A. And to be clear about what the complement of an event is, at the top of the page here, it says, in probability theory, the complement of any event A is the event not A. That is, the event that A does not occur. So the probability of A not occurring is equal to 1 minus the probability of A occurring. Now, the definition of the working definition that I'm running with when we talk about probable and improbable is something is improbable if its probability is less than 0.5, and it's probable if its probability is greater than 0.5. So if you have any event that has a probability of greater than 0.5, the complement of that event is going to have a probability of 1 minus some number greater or less than 0.5. So then that's going to be greater than 0.5. I forget if I messed up the words there, but
no, yeah, I think I get that.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, so I think my counterpoint would be akin to like we're not necessarily dealing with things in exclusively binary functions, right? When we're determining which of these propositions to believe, because let's just look at like the religion thing as an example, right? Um, so sure, we can boil down some claims to be it's this or this, right? It's A or not A, and that's fine. Like I don't dispute that at all. What I would also say is that we may have an A or not A or B, right? Which would also go with like a not A, sure, but we have these more complex formulations of things that we're going to get to, and there's going to be infinitely many more of those than there are these like basic propositions.
So for any like event A, there's the corresponding event not A, which is like improbable if A is probable and vice versa. But then you can also have an event B, which is more specific than not A. So it's like contained within not A. And this event B here would also have its corresponding event not B. So if B is like improbable, then not B is going to be probable and vice versa. It doesn't matter like how you divide it up, no matter how many specific claims you find within the complement of some claim, like no matter what claims we're talking about, there's always going to have its negation. It's always going to have its complement that is improbable if it is probable and vice versa. So I don't think that's going to work. But...
Yeah, so I guess, and this may be my final question here. So how is it that we can seed, or I guess, how is it that we can mechanically? I'm trying to think about how to phrase the question right now.
I believe I understand where that confusion is, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I believe that what we're doing is we're confusing prior probability and probability. Because like, let's say we have an event A, and then we have the complementary event like not A. A and not A don't necessarily have the same like prior probability. Like if you look at the event A, and you have some assessment of its like you look at A and you don't have any evidence, so you just assess its complexity, then and you use that as its prior probability, then at that time, now that you've assessed the probability of A based on its complexity, you can now say, like, let's say this makes A very improbable, you can now say that not A is also consequently highly probable. Like, as soon as you assess the probability of one, you know the probability of the other, given the current amount of evidence that you have. However, if you assess the probability of, like, not A independently, you may get like a different answer just because you take into account like different evidence or something. So like if we're talking about like what's the probability of no God existing, of there being no God or something, you can look at the complexity of this claim and you may get a different answer than 1 minus the probability of the claim that there is some God that exists. But this would just be due to a fault in your computation of the complexity of each claim. If you actually assess the probability, it doesn't matter how much evidence you have. If you assess the probability of one claim, then its complement is always going to be 1 minus that probability. So like it does hold, but I think the idea is like, when you look at A and then you look at not A, they can both seem improbable, but that's because you're doing it wrong, kind of thing.
Gotcha. So like the statement then is like, okay, so if we're dealing with like exclusive disjunctions, right? So like we have the A or B, now B entails not A, and because B entails not A, B is a subset of possibilities that are not A. And so because of that, we still have the affirmative, or we still have the negation of A occurring. So there is still this like, you know, half of claims then are true, right? And are half are probable and half are improbable always, and that's the belief, right?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand what you're saying here. So it sounds like you're saying like, so you have it sounds like you're making a distinction between like the negation of a claim and like kind of like the opposite of the claim, or like something, some polar opposite that somebody might be considering
Right.
if they were
Yeah,
thinking
like
of okay. Yeah, so like if you say like either God exists, or either like maybe you'd be in the situation where you're saying either the Christian God exists or no God exists, like maybe for some reason you're in this circumstance, then like you could say the negation of uh, no God exists isn't that, it's not like the complement of the other one. So like in uh, you say like no God exists, and then there's the claim that the Christian God exists. So you negate no God exists. This turns into some God exists. That's not exactly the same as the Christian God exists. So these are like separate things. But each one of these separate claims will have its own complement, which is not like the other claim. And so it doesn't matter. Like you still have these two claims that are like quote unquote opposed to each other, quote unquote the opposites of each other, but their opposites will not be the same as each other. Their complements will not be the same as each other. So yeah, it always counts like that. There's always exactly the same number of probable and improbable claims, I guess. Yeah.
okay. No, yeah, I have to see it at that point.